Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. Education across America has grown and aged into a criminal syndicate, promoting mediocrity from the local precincts of public schools to the lofty heights of Ivy League misrule. Reality itself held up to ridicule from scheduled mules loaded down with the texts and tools of our all-too-liberals' drool. Ah, yes, my friends, reality. What is it? Dare to overthink this quantity brings us all too quickly to the doorsteps of abstraction, concepts attendant on parallel universes, wormholes, and the like, which of course soon leap into sophomoric discourse and existential disputations. But reality, after all, after a long-needed hygienic bath, washes away what is imaginary, what is false, fictional, delusional, what is in very fact all things bereft of the commonsensical. Common sense, that native quantity which stands ever ready to tame the modern thinker's greed for certainty. Certainty which generally seeks to remain innocent of consequences, yet critical of simplicity. More importantly, innocent of elegant simplicity, while it obsessively preens and pants for the new and improved by the unreasonable excess of ever newer certainty. This latter, the hallmark of mediocrity dressed in the robes of authority. You've often heard me talk about the stubborn ignorance of the learned, an ignorance which abounds on the grounds and sounds of the merry-go-round called academia, whereat what is propounded as profound is more often than not muscle-bound, liberal certainty ready to dumbbell cramp into alarm bell perfidy, teacherly treachery in soulless search of a tenured perch in pedagogic perpetuity, again fancied up as authority. This ivy-beleaguered ignorance of the unlearned learned is most especially to be found among the aforementioned hustle-bound, guzzle-bound, secular progressive thinkers. Appropriately, and with the infectious corrective of humor, Mark Twain said of a cauliflower that it was a cabbage that had gone to college. I should like to add to Twain's heady irony that liberals, upon receiving postgraduate degrees, become Brussels sprouts. In short, a side dish well tolerated because it is plated along with heartier fare. It was meant to complement, not ever to replace. Thus, reality in the liberal gardens of education is seeded and soddened with well-touted innovations. To quote Twain once again, he reminded us that he himself never allowed schooling to get in the way of his education. Also, that the truth would ever remain stranger than fiction because fiction has to make sense. And that, in the very first place, God made idiots. This was for practice. Then he made school boards. Mediocrity's hospice for to nurture avarice, innovation its accomplice. Therefore, my dear listeners, each age gets the lunatics it deserves. They are not exclusively, but generally to be found on the left. Lunatic mavericks who long to organize their liberal bailiwicks from which to tell us lies for our own good. God knows they first learned the facts only to distort them, and who teach not reality for what it is, which is common sense truth, cleansed of delusion, but teach for what they wish it to be. Fantasies, ecstasy. They are our academically indoctrinated brats who will never ask permission, but are likely to demand your forgiveness. Forgiveness for all too predictable failures. Failure their liberal fixture, their characteristic tincture. A case in point is the now lost and abandoned study of history. For history is mankind's rap sheet, progressives long to bury. The heroic are reinterpreted as those of privilege, that is, privilege much too unevenly distributed. Now let us move on to dutifully examine and compile much that is juvenile of this criminal syndicate called education. Actually, miseducation, which obtains money for starters in inverse proportion to the learning it earnestly purports to generate. We are cautioned that illiteracy is not ever the fault of schools, but the community at large. Were schools to become hospitals, the increased death rate would be the fault of the patients. I call this kind of logic the meanderings of a Nancy-type Pelosi. Nancy, our healthcare maven, our new normal thinker. As with all Western civilization's whistleblowers, allow me, your whistleblower-in-chief, to ruffle the drab-colored feathers of our pedagogic pretenders. Their dull feathers they preen, we shall now pluck. Put aside your electronic gadgets and focus on reality. The criminal trial of a dozen public school educators opened recently in Atlanta, with prosecutors alleging that the teachers and administrators had engaged in a widespread, cleverly disguised conspiracy to cheat on standardized tests, altering scores in an effort to protect their jobs and win favor and bonuses from the system I've dubbed a criminal syndicate. The ongoing litigation will generate even more unpleasantness for their former colleagues at Atlanta Public Schools. The urban schools and their umbrella district have already suffered one of the most devastating testing scandals of recent years. For a state investigation in 2011 found that 178 principals and teachers in the city school district were involved in cheating on standardized tests. Dozens have either been fired or have resigned, and 21 educators have pled guilty to crimes like obstruction and perjury. Whistleblowers who raised legitimate concerns about this cheating culture were punished within the school system. Decent teachers punished, while conspirators and their student dupes run amok in infamy and illiteracy, respectively. Such is education's racketeering. Thank God they officially operate for approximately 180 days a year, with summers off, unlike mobsters and gang members who are their 27 graduates. 24/7 graduates. I correct myself. Manipulating scores in standardized tests, my friends, has been confirmed in, at the very least, 39 states of the Union and Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, I have it on good authority, plus the fruits of my own scouring and sleuthing, that Atlanta is just the tip of the test-cheating iceberg. You can wager with confidence that these cheats were to a scoundrel feathered in liberal and progressive henhouse cluckings. Once convicted, they will demand our forgiveness, for all along will be their defense. They meant well, inasmuch as reality is nothing less than an old stodgy conservative construct imposed upon idealists such as themselves. Ironically and sadly, in raising the scores of otherwise needy students and thus hiding their endless numbers, forfeited and surrendered their opportunity to get personal tutoring, sponsored by and supported by federal funds available in the tens of millions. Again, liberal self-huggers and self-hugging do-gooders leave boo-boos on their cuckoo, ballyhooed, tattooed hullabaloo. Education a no-no as long as we grab the bonus, don't you know? I have an outstanding pupil who's grown into a charismatic thinker, radio personality, and honored teacher. Back when he was teaching in Atlanta schools, he continued to pursue the earning of a doctorate. Upon receiving same, his principal called this young man into his office. Did so only to announce the following. Excuse me. He announced the following, and I quote, "I'm assigning you to hall duty only, where you will serve as monitor only. And oh yes, I ain't calling you no doctor." Dwelling upon that statement and exploring that narrative in depth will grant understanding to the realist about the shameless state of cultural affairs in America, hence Western civilization. We have squandered our hard-won freedom only to surrender it to anarchy and heathendom, whereat information trumps knowledge. Man, oh man, we are just not cool dudes. The non-traditional and or gifted student is held up as a nerd, a geek, who will one day probably perform bullet removal surgery on the cool. And the latter likely find themselves going to defense lawyers to protest their ignorance being held accountable to legal reality. Harsh and unjust reality at that. Hence victimhood's hoods, hurting for nerds when they become jailbirds. Education's failure to provide the tools for thought beyond more than gangster-style cleverness has led to rhetorical flourishes that in Nancy Pelosi's style, a style similarly uncluttered by substance, lead to the calamity of misnaming factual realities staring in one's gaping pop-eyed face, calling, for example, the illegal alien not by his or her right label, but undocumented. Under said circumstance, we can then logically state that Pelosi remains unelected because she turned against the very oath of office to uphold the Constitution and the laws of our land. Emphasis on our, as in our sovereignty as a nation. Nation, not a traveler's aid station. In reality, immigration has not been the failure of America's charity, but a failure of south of the border corruption. Incompetence, cronyism, and utter dependence on well-duped, ill-educated northern neighbors, helping to prop up their long-abandoned homes and country, where fleet-footed fleeing to America ironically robs them of the genius of place, leaving them struggling to bilk our system while remaining bereft of their own national selfhood. Small wonder that their descendants are here trying to make it there, forming crafty coalitions to attend to our sovereign bisection and ultimate perdition unto extinction. These flights from reality by educators and illegal immigrants welcome also finds a ready nest of feminist activity and feminist fury featured in smug, snug smiles for any randomly aimed camera. For how far from reality is it to declare abortion a reproductive right? Why not a right, okay, but a reductive right, reductive of zygote, fetus, or non-viable baby, however late term? Yes, reductive. Reproductive, you see, isn't really productive. Duh. For a female's oops moment, our society permits human sacrifice on the altar of another's error. My heart goes out to the nature of being a woman. That reality should be made to dawn on the female person early, very early in their existence. Gender studies in academia attempt to erase our differences. This, yet another example of escape from reality into educational's criminal inhumanity. The so-called war on women we hear so very much about, particularly at election time, is a war that is self-imposed by feminists. Feminists who use the tactical weapon of attrition to excise and extinguish femininity, their very own and their sisters. Innately, women are given to being feminine, but academically made to morph into feminists. That painful irritation is constant and makes for endless negative adjustments. They seem never to be comfortable in their own skin without appearing chagrined. When, if ever, femininity is defeated or even maimed, the result will be the fall of civilization and the solidification of shrill barbarity. Barbarity perpetrated by tyrant thuggery. We shall take our old yin and yang and gangbang it out of existence. That is to say, females becoming one of the boys. We'll all hang as yang-yang. Tune out the built-in yin. Males, never to become men, will end up ruling. Of course, Darwinism will finally have made monkeys of us all. Femininity's quiet sacrifices would shimmer even on moonless nights, along with their consummate love, all eroded away to a whimper, whimpers whose echoes shall become dimmer and never dimmer. The war on women, a real war on women, will then inevitably commence. It won't be pretty when the men will be replaced by mere males. Even as I speak, such males, not men, are aborting babies. For that clinical, cynical indifference, they are well paid. Indeed, expect to be paid. Planned Parenthood clinics, which are unsafe, as evidenced by 13 forced closures in Texas alone, nonetheless persist in their mindless war on women by welcoming and accepting the application of 11-year-old pregnant girls, granting them abortions without parental knowledge nor consent. Who can swear that it isn't a male pedophile who guides and drives the little one to the Planned Parenthood clinic, the rascal being well known to the unsuspecting family? I say family, but family is a vestigial term Planned Parenthood sees as an appendix, always apt to become appendicitis. The silent screams of millions of aborted babies is the slaughter of muted innocence, loudly interpreted as a right by lawyers who, like abortionists, also demand a fee for their disservice to human conscience, and, in turn, a disservice to civilization. Pro-choice or pro-life is only an option. Pre-choice is a solution. A solution dutifully introduced early on, long before the age of 11. Oh yes, another solution. Jail the males we loosely have come to call fathers. They are no such thing. They are pollinators of the deflowered become weeds. Excuse me. My allergy. The deflowered become weeds. Weeds in the feminist garden of crossbreeds and false leads. I'm allergic to them as well. But a short while ago, students egged on by their degraded pencil grading teachers, looking on, feverishly, succeeded in warding off scheduled commencement speakers and honorary degree recipients, and all female, whose politics they disagree with and thus disparage. Condoleezza Rice felt compelled to back out of a speech at Rutgers University. Imagine calling an intellectual lean-to a university. Also, one Christine Lagarde, the present managing director of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, why she was canceled for an appearance at Smith College, where students were circulating a petition that charged the IMF with the strengthening of imperialist and patriarchal systems that oppress and abuse women worldwide. Brandeis University reacted to faculty and student tantrums by rescinding its invitation to the writer and women's rights advocate Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who made strongly negative statements about Islam. Concomitantly, there were movements on scattered college campuses to attach so-called trigger warnings to texts which might prompt emotional turmoil in the student body. Bodies otherwise ill-used and well-used, if you get my meaning. You see, don't you, my friends, how our dumbed-down, numbed-up education syndicate has taken flight from reality, leaving their uncharged charges with an ethos sure to beget real pathos. That vile criminal syndicate has miseducated through vitriolic indoctrination our well-cheated youth, cheated unto a fitful, sometimes comfortable mediocrity. Thanks to gender studies fuddy-duddies, the syndicate has long been accountable to ever-impending reality as it rapidly goes forth, defeminizing femininity to the unease and fret of feminism itself, which has thrown out their very own babies along with their indelibly dirty bathwater, becoming clean again, ever again, a wishful fancy, even rejected in pulp fiction when at all readable. Yes, the enemy of criminal education is reality. I hope you've been keeping score. Reproductive rights not seen as reductive rights, not to mention their ill-selected choice of human rights brought forth by the unequal privilege of relativism, such as illegal aliens called undocumented. Illegal aliens being, again, that trigger warning term, causing emotional turmoil, distress, and agita. I can imagine, truly imagine, using my professorial platform to petition for cancer, being better called cellular accommodation syndrome. You wouldn't want to hurt a tumor by calling it malignant. Now, would you? Right as I speak, Ebola is entering across our boundaries. Whatever boundaries, borders, and sovereignty mean in our politically correct climate and culture with its other addenda of apocrypha. The reason of it is that closing off access to potential Ebola carriers will cause unnecessary stress and panic on West African society, and heaven forbid, topple governments. Now here is an example, par excellence, of the excess of reason elevated to the unreasonable, thus elevated to unreality, and the suspicious fiction that common sense shall ever again remain common. Thinking is obviously the result of a genuine education that never flaunts contempt for the commonsensical if it chooses to remain morally and memorably rational. A genuine education produces males and females who become men and women of merit, and most especially patience. Patience. Reflect on patience for the moment it takes to see that impatience is the cutesy province of youth alone. Youth yet to be promisingly tutored. Being impatient achieves naught but the loss of wisdom and the hegemony of mediocrity and the political theater of tantrum. One oftentimes hears from the left that Americans are fed up with the talk of the military imperative to have boots on the ground in areas of the world hostile to our interest, yet fail to endure unto victory, shall beget nothing short of defeat. Our enemy knows well that our habit of clock and calendar watching is our native weakness. Victory is never the result of haste, but the unmitigated determination to prevail. Thus, our clocks had best lock onto victory, synchronized to achieve our freedom. The absence of war, my friends, is not peace. The enemy left untamed is tantamount to our demons gone on spring break, whereupon, eventually, coming to our senses, to find ourselves inhabiting a latter-day Armageddon. Once professors, blue ribbon moron, that cap and gowned, tuition-indebted Ivy League siphon, sucking up fiction and flavoring same to fact, and just about ready to become another liberal imbibing knick-knack. Said professors, flashbacks. My friends, until next we meet in reality to ransack, consider this criminal syndicate that has permeated our entire culture and continues to do so with impunity and self-righteous spirit. So until next time we meet in reality to ransack, we'll then perhaps knapsack a bit of it. Until then, my friends, do keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.